Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. There is a very specific kind of silence that follows a long day of being around people. If you've ever come home from a gathering and felt completely wiped out, even when nothing particularly stressful happened, well, you're absolutely in the right place. We're going to unpack exactly why your brain is working overtime.
Picture this. You're sitting in your car with the engine off, or maybe you're just leaning against the kitchen counter after a long day. The silence around you isn't the peaceful silence of a house at rest. No, it's a heavy, ringing quiet. You literally feel like you just finished a marathon you didn't even sign up for. You aren't just tired, you are completely depleted.
So, what do we usually do? We brush this off as simple introversion, right? Or we just assume the other person was an energy vampire, a term that's easy to use but honestly explains very little. Psychology suggests something much deeper. See, sometimes the exhaustion isn't about how loud the room was. It's about the silent internal machinery you had to switch on just to exist within it. The problem is a deeply ingrained pattern of adaptation. Section 1. The cost of hyper-awareness, running a high-stakes emotional audit. Let's peel back the first layer here to understand this massive cognitive load. If you find yourself unusually drained after certain interactions, it's highly likely because your brain is doing way more work than the person sitting across from you. It triggers what psychologists call hyper-awareness. You aren't just casually chatting, you're sensing every single shift in tone, every micro pause in the conversation, the subtle ways energy changes when you speak. You're performing a constant high-stakes audit of the emotional environment. Why? Because your brain learned a long time ago that being ignored or replaced often comes quietly. So you sense distance before others even admit it's there. And look, this isn't a personality trait, it's a survival mechanism. And survival is, by definition, absolutely exhausting. Think of it like a mental battery. Most people use their social energy to express themselves, right? To talk, to laugh, to share. But if you grow up having to adapt, your energy is spent completely differently. You spend it evaluating the cost of the interaction, you're anticipating needs and predicting shifts in mood. Basically, you're running a massive background program scanning for conflict. And here's the thing about cognitive energy. Thinking and predicting are literally some of the most taxing things a human brain can do. Because of this, by the time a simple dinner is over, your mind has already worked one full cognitive shift. You've basically done a full day's worth of mental labor, even if you barely said a single word. Section 2. Surviving unpredictable childhoods, when calm means danger. To really get why your brain operates this way, we have to look at how childhood shapes the brain's processing of safety. For kids whose emotional worlds were overlooked or where support was just unreliable, the brain learns a really difficult lesson. It learns that peace isn't relaxing. It's actually a warning sign. When affection or stability is inconsistent, part of the mind has to stay alert, even in completely peaceful situations. You learn that calm is often just the prelude to something going wrong. This pattern builds over an entire lifetime. It starts with that inconsistent emotional support in childhood. In response, the brain develops this constant mental alertness to protect itself. And then finally, in adulthood, when you're around people who are unpredictable or just feel heavy, your nervous system doesn't see a friend to connect with. It sees a task to manage. Your brain doesn't see a casual interaction, it sees a potential threat to your stability. You might actually be practicing a subconscious form of this right now without even realizing it. Psychologists call it parentification. This is when you feel responsible for managing the emotional temperature of the people in the room. You suppress your own needs to stay low maintenance or easy, falsely believing your feelings are somehow less important than the harmony of the group. You weren't born with this trait. You became this way because there was really no other option. Section 3. The traits of adaptation, the hidden legacy of growing up fast. These childhood adaptations, they don't just magically disappear when you turn 18. They transform into deeply ingrained traits that define how you interact with the whole world. You might recognize some of these rare traits in yourself. Things like an intense emotional independence, where asking for help feels deeply uncomfortable because help was never reliable. Or a split maturity, being super wise and responsible, yet feeling emotionally unfulfilled inside because you didn't get the time to learn how to need others safely. You might have guarded empathy. You read people extremely well, but you protect yourself because you know the heavy cost of caring. And beneath all of that, there's often a deep fear of being temporary and an overwhelming guilt for simply needing attachment. Now, what's truly fascinating is how this completely reframes societal labels. What the outside world might call lazy or procrastinating, is actually extreme mental fatigue. Your mind rarely rests, and by the time physical action is required, your cognitive energy is already spent from all that evaluating and predicting. What looks like being overly independent is just a brain that learned not to trust. And what looks like a low-maintenance personality, that's actually a survival mechanism of suppressing needs to avoid conflict. So you see, you aren't fighting a character flaw here. You are fighting profound mental exhaustion.
Section 4. Turning off the machinery, from endurance to rest. So, how do we move from this state of chronic exhaustion toward a genuine sense of calm understanding? First, we have to reframe your strength. This hypersensitivity, this ability to read a room in seconds, is often called a gift. But let's be real, it was a gift built for survival, not for success. You really need to realize that you aren't weak for being drained. In fact, research on resilience shows that chronic social pressure has actually built you a massive reserve of silent, high emotional endurance. You can survive disappointment without breaking down because you've seen it before.
The core truth we need to acknowledge is that your nervous system simply adapted to pressure way too early. It forced you to learn responsibility long before you ever felt true emotional safety. You learned strength before softness.
Clarity finally comes when you put these steps into practice. First, stop blaming yourself for the exhaustion. Second, recognize this hyper-awareness pattern for what it is, an old survival tool. Third, start actively choosing safe environments. And fourth, give yourself permission to finally turn off that internal machinery. You no longer have to be the one responsible for everyone else's emotional temperature.
You are finally allowed to rest, and I mean truly rest. Not just because you've completed a task or because you successfully pleased the group, but because you are an adult now who can begin to choose environments and people that actually deserve your energy. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to reflect on. If you feel completely exhausted after being around certain people, is it truly because of them, or is it because your nervous system is still trying to protect a version of yourself that is no longer in danger? Ask yourself, are you fighting an old battle in a new room?
Ultimately, understanding your mind isn't about fixing a flaw. It's about acknowledging exactly why the weight feels so heavy and realizing that perhaps you've carried it long enough. The real question now is, what incredible things could your mind achieve if you finally allowed it to put that weight down and just exist?